R.L. Clevenger and the End of the World by Donnie Lamon. From the files of R.L. Clevenger, Monster Hunter. The end of the world came to R.L. Clevenger, much the same as it had for the last 52 years. In his isolated farmhouse, deep up in a holler over in Rocky Flats, the end of the world could be 3 weeks gone, and news of its going would not have reached the eyes and ears of R.L. Clevenger. He was sitting on his front porch, stringing up beans for the hard winter to come when it happened, and it was portended by the frenzied barking of his 3 blue ticks tied up in the backyard. He laid his string of green beans aside and listened while they squalled and yammered. They smelled something strange and alien and were just about crazy with wanting to get at it. He looked down his gravel driveway and saw nothing. The edge of the clearing, nothing. It wasn't like them to get excited over nothing. The 2 males, Bo and Luke, were as disciplined as 2 dogs ever were, and Elon, the female, was much too smart to bark at a squirrel or groundhog that got too close to the yard. R.L. looked at the driveway again, dark and gray, with little fingers of morning sunlight poking it through the trees like as if to wake it up. He looked down at the tangle of beans beside him. He looked up at the road again, and saw him. He was a tilt of a man in the distance, leaned forward, walking as if he'd just crossed some vast desert instead of Highway 321 just down the road. He was wearing shorts and a t-shirt, and as he drew closer, R.L. could read the word Dollywood on it.
Tourist, R.L. said to himself. The man in the distance was wearing one flip-flop. The other foot was bare and scraping along the gravel driveway. The man did not seem to notice. He shuffled closer to the house. The dogs were screaming, almost throwing their voices hoarse. "Hush now," R.L. snapped. "It ain't nothing but some lost tourist looking for his cabin." "What do you say there?" he called to the man. But the man took no notice of him. He just kept sloshing forward toward the house. "Huh," R.L. said. He stood on the porch. "Hey," he called. "I don't know about Ohio or wherever it is you come from, but down here it ain't right to come up on a man's place without saying nothing." The strange man did not reply. He just kept staggering forward. R.L. watched him step full through a large mud hole in the middle of the driveway and take no notice of it. "Drunk," R.L. said. "Look here," he called. "We don't call the law around these parts. We just handle things ourselves. You'd best be stating your business or turn right and round and go back to where you come from." The man kept slinking towards the house. The dogs would not stop crying. R.L. cursed and went into the house and grabbed his double-barrel 12-gauge from the rack above the door and broke it down. He reached into the side table and pulled out 2 shells and popped them in the barrels and slammed it home.
"Dogs and tourists gonna drive me crazy," he mumbled and went back out onto the porch. The man was a lot closer to the house now, about 50 feet away. R.L. could make him out pretty clear now, and there was something wrong with him. His face was all crazy and weird, and he was snarling and reaching out like an animal. Or a zombie, R.L. thought. Just like in one of them late-night movies he used to stay up and watch as a kid. "Huh," R.L. said. He had been planning to fire a warning shot over the man's head, but then he decided to lower the shotgun to center mass, just like he'd been taught in basic training. He pulled back one hammer and let it fall. The gun exploded, and the shell struck the man square in the chest, and he fell backward and lay there kind of twitching and slobbering, and the dogs were still going crazy, and R.L. lowered the shotgun to his side. He stepped down off the porch, walked toward the gory heap in the driveway. Just then the thing groaned and moved like it was going to get up. Then R.L. remembered in the movies that you have to shoot zombies in the head, something about their central nervous system. And so he cocked the remaining barrel and lowered the shotgun sight to the thing's head and pulled the trigger. And that was the end of that. Or so he thought. The dogs started screaming from the back of the house, whining, sharp, dreadful-like, as if they were being butchered. R.L. ran to the back of the house and saw 2 zombies kneeling at the tattered mess of meat and hair that had been Bo,
while another zombie was pulling at Luke's lifeless body to drag it loose from the doghouse he was tied to. Elon was pulling at her leash, crazy, trying to get loose. The chain rattled against the metal hook screwed into the doorpost of her doghouse. RL gasped, and the zombie dropped Luke and turned toward him. He raised the shotgun, cocked both barrels, leveled it on the zombie's head, and squeezed the trigger. His heart sank at the dry click-click of the hammers falling impotently into place. He turned the gun around and swung it butt first as hard as he could at the zombie lurching toward him. The butt smashed into the zombie's jaw, making its head reverb back and forth like a punching bag, and then the thing fell twitching at RL's feet. The two kneeling zombies heard and saw and stood and started coming toward him. He took the shotgun up again and began smashing at the metal hook that held Elon's chain fast. She pulled at the chain as he smashed at the hook, and the two zombies got closer and closer. Finally, the chain broke free from its mooring, and Elon charged the two approaching zombies, snarling, after revenge for her two brothers.
"Quit that!" RL snapped. "There ain't no time for that." Elon stopped in her tracks and quieted and turned and followed RL running back inside the house. RL slammed the door behind him and went to the side table and grabbed 2 more shells and shoved them in the barrels and went out on the porch, and there were 4 or 5 zombies standing there at the bottom trying to navigate the steps up toward the porch. RL looked above him at the driveway and beyond, and he could see probably 20 or 30 more ambling up toward the house. He said, "I don't believe 2 barrels can handle that." And he slammed the door closed and locked it and bolted it. He ran into the utility room and grabbed his toolbox and popped it open and pulled out a hammer and a handful of nails. He went to work popping the hinge bolts from all the interior doors and placing the slabs crosswise against the outer doors and windows. He toe-nailed them into the double studs at the edges. In the movies, they never toe-nail the boards, they thought. That's why the zombies pushed through them so easily. When he had boarded up the house, he sat on the couch and got out his phone and called his mama in Del Rio. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, and went to voicemail. RL looked at his watch, 11:30. Mama watching Price is Right, he thought. "Hey, Mama," he said when the phone beeped. "Just checking in on you. They got this end of the world going on. Well, we'll talk to you later." He hung up the phone. He sat back in his chair. Elon inched over to him, put her head in his lap. He reached down and scratched her ears absent-mindedly. He heard the sound of thunder outside, but it wasn't thunder. The more he listened to it, it was helicopters flying low, military-grade from the sound of them.
They flew by low, and the house shook, and then they dissipated out and away. "Old Donald J. is right on the job," RL mumbled. The porch began to creak with the weight of 20 or 30 zombies. RL was glad he'd set the joists on 16-inch centers last summer. They began pressing and scratching at the door and windows. RL got up and ran upstairs to the front-facing bedroom and looked out the window down at the roof of the porch, out and into the front yard, and it was filled with zombies, pressing against each other, trying to get in the house like the Rolling Stones were inside. "Huh," he said. He turned, and Elon was there in the bedroom threshold, watching him.
"We got trouble, old girl," RL said, and he walked past her back downstairs to the living room. He spent the next few minutes taking an inventory of all of his firearms and ammunition. The 12-gauge double barrel, Remington 870 pump action, AR-15, and so on. He got them all laid out on the kitchen table and got them loaded up and ready. And he didn't know if all his guns could get him and Elon out of this, but it made him feel better to do it. The sounds outside grew louder. The shuffling, growling, scratching, slobbering push against the house. And the house in turn began to growl its own bitter resistance. RL could hear the timbers in the wall groaning like deathbed prayers. The house had been built in 1898, constructed of white oak milled out in true timbers, true 2x4s and 6s and 8s and 10s. None of this half-size business you get from Lowe's and Home Depot these days. But even that, he knew, could not save the house from the staggering push that had come against it outside. RL reckoned there were hundreds out there, and it might even be thousands before it was all over. He wondered what made him wander so far away from town. And then he figured that maybe they had done eat up what was in town.
And now, like any animal, hunger had driven them farther out for food. He didn't know. All he knew was that soon they would make a pile of lumber out of his house, and he just couldn't bear the thought of meeting his daddy up in heaven and having to tell him that he let a bunch of zombies tear down the house that his granddaddy had built. He knew he had to do something, and do something quick. He whistled for Elon. She came, happily. "Come on, old girl," he said. "We got work to do."
Some few minutes later, RL and Elon were poised at the back door in the kitchen. RL had his AR-15 raised and at the ready. Elon had her teeth bared and grim determination etched on her canine face. A quick glance through a crack in the rampart at the kitchen window told him that the zombies had not yet gathered in mass behind the house. He figured there weren't more than a dozen or so back there milling around in the backyard like the blind. He knew that it would only be a matter of time before they discovered the back porch and the door there, and then alerted the other zombies, however they do it, and then he and Elon would be fully flanked, and there would be no escape. It was now or never. He took a crowbar to the interior door he'd barricaded across the back door, and made short work of it. Then he looked at Elon, and she looked back, and he pulled the back door open, and he and his dog stepped out into the backyard. The zombies, as if in possession of some acute sense of smell or perhaps hearing, all turned simultaneously toward the emerging pair and began shuffling toward them, their gruesome mouths salivating and their sinewy arms outstretched toward them, fingers clutching and grabbing at air like crawdads stuck under a fisherman's knife. RL raised his AR-15 and sighted the head of one up from the porch and pulled the trigger, and the thing fell in the yard. The others, unmoved and unperturbed by grief, continued toward them.
RL stepped down off the porch and fired off another round, dropping another zombie, the one closest to him. Having cleared enough distance between himself and the other zombies, he and Elon sprinted toward the barn, some 80 or 90 feet behind the house. Once inside, he slid the door closed behind him and bolted it, and leaned his rifle aside, and turned on the barn lights overhead and assessed their situation. In the dimly lit gloom of the barn, he saw first his daddy's old 1939 Dodge flatbed 3/4-ton truck. Behind the truck, in the corner, was a small plywood enclave, closed off and padlocked, and RL remembered what was in there: a box of dynamite. And if you're wondering why R.L. Clevenger had a box of dynamite in his barn, then you don't know R.L. Clevenger. He started to get an idea. An old 1939 Dodge flatbed and a box of dynamite could solve most any problem. It could sure enough take care of the zombie horde gathering outside the barn. But how would RL and Elon get out of the barn? That was the question. Then R.L. Clevenger got an idea.
An hour later, there were hundreds of zombies gathered at the barn. They groaned and staggered and pushed at the old barn, trying to get inside to the meat that they knew was there. They paid no notice to the hammering and clanking that was coming from inside. In their frayed and tattered brains, it was just the hammering and clanking of meat. They paid no notice to the old Dodge's straight-six flathead engine as it coughed and sputtered and roared to life. Then, the huge sliding door covering the mouth of the barn raised up from the bottom as the old Dodge crept out from underneath it and scattered the zombies that were gathered there out and onto the ground around it. The old flatbed had a modified plywood box on the back. It lurched forward, riding out first gear, cutting a path through the zombies like a hot knife through butter. The zombie ranks parted as the truck passed through, and then closed again around its flank, and followed it, groaning with hunger as it sputtered out in low gear down the driveway, away from the barn and the house. Soon, all of them were following, hundreds of them, and the truck sang out in low gear like some weird dystopian redneck Pied Piper, down the twisting gravel driveway until it turned off the road, off into a rocky clearing and stopped, and the old transmission rattled and ground up into park. The truck idled there until all the zombies had gathered around it. They reached and groaned and pushed at the old truck, and the old truck rocked and groaned on its springs. The rear plywood panel in the makeshift box truck popped off, and a Honda three-wheeler exploded out and onto the zombies gathered there, sending them wheeling backward. RL and Elon were aboard, the dog strapped to the seat behind the man, and the man was firing a Sig Sauer P365 with one hand and steering the vehicle with the other,
as it bounced and wobbled and settled straight on the ground. RL twisted the throttle as hard as he could, and the two knobby back tires spun gravel and dirt, and the zombies stood for a moment looking idiotically at the man and dog as they sped away. Before their ruined brains could instruct them to follow the pair, the dynamite in the back of the old Dodge exploded, sending shards of twisted metal rifling through the ranks of zombies, and the percussion of it rendered them a mass of rotten limbs and heads lying in the rocky clearing. RL and Elon sped up the driveway toward the house. RL unstrapped the dog. She hopped down from the seat and followed RL up to the barn, where he retrieved a shovel and started back down toward the doghouses to bury Bo and Luke. Elon sat and watched him the whole time. When he had them in the ground, she plotted herself there, over their graves. RL went up to the house and got her a bowl of water and took it and sat in front of her. Then he went back up onto the porch and sat down and started stringing beans again.
If you enjoyed this story, please consider dropping a tip in the tip jar. If you like original stories set in Appalachia, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell for notification. Thank you kindly for your time.